He didn't just call Chuck Norris's mentor a fraud, he did it on a global stage, and what Chuck did next wasn't a response. It was a warning, written in silence, sweat, and shattered pride. But before we dive in, drop your location in the comments. And if this story grabs you, make sure you're subscribed. The Soul World Martial Arts Expo wasn't just another event. It was sacred ground. Inside a dome packed wall to wall with flashing banners and burning ambition, legends brushed shoulders with rookies, and every black belt gleamed like it had something to prove. At the center of the hall, the spotlight fixed on one polished square mat, a stage surrounded by lights, cameras, and anticipation thick enough to choke on. And standing dead center, holding the mic like a dagger, was Gene Q. His name alone sparked arguments in dojos worldwide. Five-time international champion, Taekwondo prodigy, South Korea's golden fist, and an ego that could level buildings. Wearing a flawless white dobok and a black belt tied with surgical precision, Gene didn't need to speak to take over a room. But when he did, he scanned the crowd, challengers, coaches, reporters, then let the silence simmer. "Let's be honest," he began, voice smooth as silk and sharp as broken glass. "Every year we gather here to honor real warriors, fighters, not actors, not illusionists." A few uneasy laughs rippled through the audience. Gene tilted his head, eyes gleaming. "In fact, it's time we stop confusing choreography with combat." Murmurs, glances. Then Gene dropped the hammer. "I've seen the footage," he said. David Morgan, the so-called master behind half of Hollywood's fight scenes. The man who supposedly trained Chuck Norris. He threw air quotes around trained like they were shackles. He didn't teach martial arts, he taught camera tricks. Staged punches, timing cues. Now the laughter was louder, but not from everyone. In the front row, Chuck Norris sat unmoving. Cowboy boots flat, hands folded. Jacket zipped to the collar, eyes locked forward like a statue carved in war. He didn't flinch, didn't blink. But anyone who truly knew him saw it. The half-second pause in his breath. The stillness that no longer felt neutral. Gene wasn't finished. Not even close. He stepped forward, grin widening like a blade. "Tell me, does teaching actors how to fake a punch make you a master?" A cruel smirk. "Oh, then I guess every Hollywood stuntman is a 10th Dan now." Whispers spread. Heads turned, some eyes darted to Chuck, but he still hadn't moved. His silence now carried weight, not absence, pressure. Gene tasted the tension and leaned into it. David Morgan never fought killers. He growled. He never bled in the ring. He taught illusions, not survival. The moderator shifted, clearly uneasy. An interpreter stumbled, unsure whether to continue. The insult didn't need translation. It struck in every language. Gene's eyes scanned the hall again, daring someone. Then he did it. He locked eyes with Chuck and said, slow and deliberate, "If his ghost is watching, tell him to come shut me up." And the room froze. No one breathed. The air itself seemed to buckle under the weight of that line. A child clutched his father's sleeve. A woman lowered her camera. Somewhere in the back, an old master whispered something that sounded like a prayer. Chuck didn't move, but something in the atmosphere shifted, like the quiet before lightning splits the sky. This wasn't tension anymore. This was provocation. And something was about to break. "We call them masters." Gene's voice cut the room like a scalpel. "We clap for them like they've survived the grind, the sacrifice." He paused, locked eyes with the one man who still hadn't moved. But they haven't. That was the line, the shift, the moment the murmur stopped being general and became personal. Because now the target wasn't David Morgan, it was Chuck Norris. A camera flashed, then another. In the second row, a teenage black belt gasped, eyes wide. "He's gonna say his name?" The whisper barely audible. Gene did. Chuck Norris. He didn't say it with reverence. He said it like a challenge, like a dare. "You were the poster boy, weren't you?" He began circling slowly, mic loose in his hand like a fuse about to spark. A cowboy hats, roundhouse kicks, studio lighting. "Your mentor made you look untouchable." Chuck finally lifted his gaze, not at Gene, not at anyone, just up. A quiet motion, a reset. Gene didn't notice. Or maybe he didn't care. Tell me." he went on, voice louder, sharper. Oh, when was the last time you bled in silence? When was the last time you entered a ring with no stunt coordinator? No second takes. The crowd was still. Every word came down like a gavel. I've got 5 countries, 7 titles. No padding, no retakes. He raised the mic like a weapon. Your belts don't impress me. Your mentor doesn't impress me. And then he pointed. Right at Chuck. If David Morgan meant that much to you, then defend him. Gasps. But Chuck didn't blink, didn't move. Not yet. Gene twisted the knife deeper. Or sit down and admit what we all know. His voice was razor sharp now. The kind that presses in behind your ears and makes the air feel thinner. Even the moderators were frozen. Cameras kept rolling, but no one dared speak. Then Gene stepped forward. One last strike. He lowered the mic, just enough so only the room, and every boom mic could catch it. Tell your ghost, he whispered, to make me stop. Time hesitated. Then Chuck stood. Not sudden, not dramatic. Inevitable. Like a mountain finally shifting after centuries of stillness, the air collapsed inward. Some spectators stood without realizing. A journalist dropped their notepad, didn't move to pick it up. Gene blinked. Chuck walked forward, boots heavy, deliberate, not to the stage, but to the mat. The demonstration mat. That square of quiet canvas, never meant for this, not for vendettas, not for ghosts. Now it was a battleground. Gene smirked. Oh, he said, did I touch a nerve? Chuck reached the edge of the mat, stopped. When his voice came, it didn't need amplification. It slid through the room like cold steel. Say what you want about me. His eyes met Gene's. But David Morgan taught more honor in a single breath than you've shown your entire career. Gasps. Low. Raw. Gene rolled his shoulders, waving it off. Then defend him, cowboy. Chuck stepped onto the mat. Boots hit canvas with a thud that sounded biblical. Even if he's not here to see it, no spotlight hit the mat, but every eye did. There was no bell, no announcement. But the moment he stepped forward, there was a reckoning. Gene stood at the edge, watching, still smug, still thinking he had control. He looked to the moderator with a smirk. It looks like the cowboy wants a demo, he said, fishing for laughs. A few came nervous, strained. But the moderator said nothing. No one did, because this wasn't a panel anymore. Gene dropped from the stage with a soft thud, rolled his shoulders, sighed like a man about to entertain a child. But this wasn't for show. Not anymore. Only the phones were rolling now, hundreds of them, rising one by one like stars in the dark. Gene crossed the mat's edge. His bounce was casual. Loosen, let's see what old school Texas has left in the tank, he smirked. Chuck said nothing. Jean bowed. Barely, just enough to pass. Chuck didn't bow back. He lowered his chin, feet shoulder width, eyes forward. No stance, no flourish, just stillness, like a loaded weapon waiting to be drawn. Gene began to circle. I'll be gentle, he said with a wink. Wouldn't want to break anything vital. Then he struck, a front kick. Sharp, fast, clean, aimed at the center. Chuck didn't flinch. His left forearm swept across, absorbed the blow, redirected it into the mat. No retreat, no counter, just balance. Gene bounced back, laughed. All right, he grinned. He came again, a spinning roundhouse, high and theatrical, the kind that ends matches, that lands on posters. Chuck ducked. Effortless, the kick sliced empty air, still no retaliation. Gene landed, frowned. Come on, cowboy, louder this time. You're not just here to be a scarecrow, are you? Chuck's voice, when it came, was ice, erasing movement. It was the first thing he'd said on the mat. Jean blinked, then grinned wider, wasting movement. He mocked the phrase like it was a joke. What David taught you. He stepped in again, efficiency and silence. Then he attacked. A flurry, 3 rapid kicks came low, middle, high. Chuck blocked the first 2. The third clipped his cheekbone. A thin red line opened beneath his left eye, sharp as a blade drawn in silence. The crowd gasped. A few phones zoomed in, pixels tightening like scopes on the first mark drawn. Gene danced back, arms spread There it is, he called out, his voice slick with mock triumph. The first real contact in Chuck Norris's history, he clapped, mockingly. One or two hesitant laughs followed. But they died quick. The room knew better now. Chuck didn't move. He blinked once, letting the blood trail down his cheek like rain off a statue. No rage, no reaction, just breath calm, deliberate. Watching, waiting, Jean lowered his arms. His grin twitched at the edges. Come on, movie man, he said, voice dropping into something darker. Give them something to cheer for? Chuck still didn't advance, just adjusted his footing. A subtle shift, one only real fighters noticed. In the second row, an older Muay Thai master leaned toward his student, whispered like a warning. He's not loading. Gene kept circling. The crowd, frozen, phones up, no one speaking. Even the moderator looked like a man staring at a tidal wave. Chuck remained planted, calm, centered, like a stone in the eye of a storm. Gene feinted a jab, then snapped a kick low toward Chuck's thigh. It landed with a solid thud. He smirked. Emboldened, he threw a second. Same spot, harder. Chuck absorbed it again. No recoil, just a slight bend in the knee. Then came the third. But this time, Chuck moved. Not backward, forward. His rear leg swept in with surgical speed. A low kick boned first, cracking into Gene's lead thigh right on the femoral nerve. The sound echoed like a branch snapping in winter. Gene's leg buckled. Just half an inch. But it was enough. A gasp rippled through the crowd like wind over tall grass. He staggered, blinking, foot dragging. He tried to bounce to reset, but the spring was gone. He threw a wild jab to keep Chuck back. Chuck slipped it like mist, then stepped inside. The hook came next, short, tight, mechanical. A piston driving straight from the hip into Gene's ribs. Ugh. The impact folded him with a grunt, air coughing out in a single sharp breath. No applause, no roars, just the sound of reality sinking in. Gene stumbled 2 steps back, arms shaking like he was resetting for the cameras. A lucky shot, he muttered, but his voice cracked. Sweat beaded at his temples. Chuck didn't chase, didn't gloat. He stood, breathing steady, watching. Gene rushed. Desperation bled into every movement. He spun into a high kick, flashy, reckless, all ego. But Chuck had already pivoted low, ducked under the arc, stepped in close and caught the leg mid-spin. Time slowed. Chuck didn't roar, didn't smirk. He just shifted his hips, drove forward like a wave with nowhere else to go. Shane went airborne. Then, thud, flat on his back. No grace, no choreography, just force, precision, and gravity. The crowd didn't cheer. They exhaled. Chuck stepped back, gave space. Gene stared up at the lights, dazed. Blinked once, then twice. No swagger, no grin. He tried to sit up. His ribs disagreed. Chuck's voice came soft, low, and surgical. David taught me that too. That was the moment it all shifted. Not the throw, not the blood, the realization. This wasn't a movie. This wasn't an actor. This was a man shaped by real pain, by a master the world had already forgotten. Jean Q sat there, palms to canvas, chest heaving, not from exertion, but disbelief. Around him, the silence stretched thin as glass. No one moved. No one breathed. The air felt darker like the lights had dimmed, and Chuck just stood there. No stance, no pose, no performance. That was what made it worse. Gene forced himself upright, jaw clenched, limbs shaking. He tried to force rhythm into his breath, tried to will away the boiling humiliation behind his ribs. He'd fought on 5 continents, held titles, spoken to press in 3 languages, but now his body was betraying him. And Chuck looked like a man waiting in line for coffee. Gene's ego howled. With a snarl, he lunged, a fast back fist into a high roundhouse, into a feint and a spinning hook kick. A flashy sequence, highlight real chaos. But Chuck didn't need to read it. He cut through. He stepped into the center of Gene's spin, caught the incoming leg, slipped under the rotation, and grabbed the belt, not at the waist, but lower, near the hip seam. Then pivoted, hard, clean, brutal, sweep, turn, drive. Gene's other leg lost grip. Down he went, not flat this time, sideways. Hips slammed to the mat, upper body twisted behind like a man thrown out of time. He grunted. Pain bloomed across his shoulder. A Thai coach in the 5th row whispered, stunned, an inside hook sweep from someone who isn't supposed to be real. Chuck backed away again. No theatrics, just room. Gene groaned, rolled to all fours, tried to rise. He never saw the next move coming. Chuck was already there, quiet, efficient. He reached down, hooked 2 fingers into the back of Gene's dobok collar, lifted just enough to unbalance him, and then spun his own body with a twist of the hips. Crack! The elbow came from below, clean, perfect, right into Gene's jaw. And the crowd, it didn't erupt. It held its breath, because everyone in that room, every fighter, every master, every camera, had just realized. He wasn't here to play. The edge of the arena through the thin curtain of silence that hung like fog over the room. Every eye stayed on him. Nobody called his name. Nobody reached out for a handshake. Reverence, the kind reserved for lightning or ghosts, the kind you feel when myth becomes man in front of you and still does things legends can't. Behind him, Gene Q hadn't moved, not fully. His hand gave another twitch, more nerve than intent. The medic hovered now, not rushing, but reverent too, like approaching a relic cracked but still sacred. Gene's chest rose, then fell unevenly. He was breathing, yes, but it sounded borrowed, rattled. He blinked slow, one eyelid lagging behind, trying to gather the pieces of himself scattered across that mat. The audience remained frozen, phones still up, but no one was recording anymore. They were witnessing. This wasn't a fight, it was a message, and messages don't end with applause. Chuck reached the end of the corridor. He paused only to pull up his hoodie's hood, shadowing his face as he passed through the threshold of light into backstage gloom. No one followed, no crew, no cameras. He vanished the way a lesson leaves your mouth dry and your spine cold. Back on the mat, the MC finally found his voice, but barely. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, but even the mic seemed reluctant to speak. There was no finish to announce, no winner to crown, only silence to preserve. John Q rolled to his side, groaning through teeth that now felt unfamiliar in his mouth. A medic supported his shoulders, speaking in soft, measured tones he couldn't process. He waved him off again, weaker now, the denial not defiant but instinctive, like a man still pretending the curtain hadn't dropped. But the fight was over, long over. Gene's black belt, once nodded proudly, sharply, lay coiled beside him like a shed skin. His dobok clung to his body, twisted, sweat-soaked, streaked with blood and truth. He sat there, legs splayed, eyes vacant. The weight of it wasn't pain. It was realization that this stage, this moment, this mat, didn't belong to him. It never had. In the seats, a young fighter, barely 20, amateur belt still fresh, turned to his coach and whispered. He didn't even look angry. The coach nodded. Because it wasn't about him, and that was it. Not a comeback story, not a redemption arc. Just a course correction delivered by the last man on earth qualified to give it. Chuck Norris didn't win. He reminded the world that truth doesn't need permission to land. It only needs a quiet place and a mat, fingers twitching, searching for something that wasn't there. Balance, pride, an exit. But there was none. Just the lights, the mat, and the echo. Inside the Expo's control room, a producer sat frozen, headset crooked on one ear, his hand hovering over a button he no longer remembered the purpose of. Do we cut to break? Someone whispered behind him. No one answered. At the far end of the arena, a screen replayed the final elbow in slow motion again and again. Not for show, not for hype, just because no one had turned it off. Every time the strike landed, there was a collective flinch, like the room itself couldn't forget. The sound of it, not the impact, but the silence that followed, looped heavier than any soundtrack. And Gene Q, still seated, still slumped, still staring toward the exit like it might open and give him his old self back. He had said he came to demonstrate technique. He had promised a masterclass. Instead, he had become a footnote in someone else's lesson. A coach leaned over to his student's voice barely audible. Remember this. This is what happens when you train to be famous instead of right. Backstage, Chuck moved through the final hall. No entourage, no press handler, no social media crew catching every frame. Just a man, his breath, and the soft squeak of his sneakers on linoleum. He passed a row of lockers, pausing only to glance at one briefly. An old dent in the metal, probably from years ago. A reminder of another time, another fight, one that mattered. He didn't stop. Down the hall, a door opened quietly. A familiar face stepped out, an older man, lean, weathered eyes like polished stone. It was Master Ren, David Morgan's last senior student. They didn't bow. They didn't shake hands. They just stood there for a breath, too, then nodded once. Mutual, absolute, the kind of gesture forged in years of bruises and silence. He would have been proud, Ren said finally, voice low. Chuck didn't smile. He just replied, I didn't do it for pride. Ren nodded. Chuck pulled a folded piece of paper from his hoodie pocket. It had creases from years of keeping. Ren took it wordlessly. When he opened it, it was a handwritten note. 5 words. Let the mat speak first. David's words. Chuck turned and left without waiting for a reply. The door closed behind him with a soft click, final as a period. Online, the fire spread. Clips dissected. Frame-by-frame analysis. Fighters reacting live. Streams flooded with comments from keyboard black belts and real ones alike. Some praised the technique. Others debated intent. But most just stared, watched, sat with what it meant. On one podcast, a respected BJJ black belt put it best, that wasn't a fight. That was a man reminding another what martial arts are: discipline, not display. Silence, not show. The forums lit up too. Gene Q got humbled so bad, it echoed backward through his highlight reel. Chuck didn't just beat him. He subtracted everything fake. The mat doesn't lie. It's just been waiting to speak. And in dojos around the world, quiet shifts began. Students tied their belts slower, bowed deeper. Coaches paused longer before demonstrations. And somewhere in a small gym lit by buzzing fluorescents, a teenage boy stood before a mirror, not practicing kicks, not throwing punches, just adjusting his stance, straightening his belt, breathing. He didn't want to be seen. He wanted to be ready. The hum of the cabin was low, a kind of hush that matched the mood stitched to his bones. Chuck didn't sleep. He rarely did after a moment like that. Not because of adrenaline, not anymore, but because he knew the weight of truth didn't settle until silence had time to stretch out and breathe. Outside, stars glinted dimly behind thin clouds, and for a moment the whole world seemed still again. Across the aisle, a young woman was scrolling on her phone. She didn't notice Chuck. Most didn't, not like they used to. She paused on a video. The clip, the one, the still frame. Gene Q sitting slumped looking toward a ghost, her brows furrowed. She watched it again and again. Then slowly she put the phone down and stared forward, quiet. Chuck caught it, just barely. That pause, that shift. It wasn't judgment or hype, it was absorption. It meant more than any standing ovation ever could. He leaned back, closed his eyes. David's voice echoed in his head. Not from memory, but muscle. You don't teach with volume. You teach with clarity. By morning, every martial arts blog had weighed in. The biggest tournament sponsors issued statements calling it a moment of reckoning. Dojo signups surged. Not because kids wanted to be famous, but because they wanted to understand. Understand what they'd just witnessed. What they felt. Gene Q, for his part, went silent. No tweets, no videos, no comeback arc in bold font. For once, his social media pages were blank. Just a black square posted hours after the fight, captioned with 3 words. I heard it. The martial world responded not with scorn, but with silence. A kind of unspoken agreement. Let him sit with it. Let it work. Days later, in a quiet community dojo in Arizona, a young instructor adjusted a student's stance. Not harshly, just enough to center her feet. Then he paused, eyes catching something over her shoulder. A poster hung on the wall now. Not flashy, no title. Just that one still frame. Gene Q, half upright, looking toward the corridor. Beneath it, in plain black letters, the mat always tells the truth. He nodded to himself, then got back to teaching. Chuck landed in a smaller city the next morning. No media, no cameras. Just a dusty airstrip and an old friend waiting in a pickup truck. He tossed his duffel in the back, climbed in and gave a tired half-smile. "You look like you slept on ghosts," the driver said. "I slept on peace," Chuck replied. The truck pulled away. Somewhere in the distance, a bell rang just once, like punctuation. Like closure, the world kept turning, but something had shifted.